The ink on the document was still fresh enough to smudge, yet the betrayal it represented had clearly been marinating for months. I stood in my own living room, holding a deed of gift that claimed I had willingly handed over my grandfather's estate to my mother-in-law, while my husband, Alex, toasted our 10th anniversary with a glass of vintage Bordeaux he knew I'd saved for a special occasion. He looked at me with those warm, deceptive eyes, completely unaware that I had found the folder hidden inside his gym bag only 20 minutes before the guests arrived. The house I had spent my entire life protecting was no longer mine on paper, and the man I shared my bed with was the one who had guided the pen. For a long time, my life felt like a series of soft, muted colors: beige linens, warm sunlight filtering through the willow trees outside, and the comforting scent of expensive candles. I was a restorer of antique furniture. I spent my days bringing life back to things that the world had forgotten or broken. Perhaps that was my first mistake, believing that everything could be fixed if you just applied enough patience and the right kind of polish. We lived in the Willow House, a sprawling, century-old Victorian that my grandfather had left specifically to me. It wasn't just real estate, it was a sanctuary of dark oak, stained glass, and memories of a man who taught me that a person's word was their most valuable currency. Alex was the perfect husband on the surface. He was a high-end real estate agent, charismatic and perpetually dressed in tailored suits that smelled of sandalwood and ambition. When we married, he promised to help me maintain the Willow House, and for years he did exactly that. He handled the contractors when the roof leaked and navigated the complex property taxes that came with such a large estate. I trusted him implicitly. Why wouldn't I? He was the man who brought me tea in bed every Sunday morning and who always remembered the anniversary of my father's passing. We had a rhythm, a quiet domestic dance that I thought would last until we were both gray and withered. Then there was Elena, my mother-in-law. She was a woman who navigated life like a chess grandmaster, always thinking 3 moves ahead and never showing her hand. Elena didn't shout, she whispered. She didn't demand, she suggested until you felt like her idea was actually your own. In the beginning, our relationship was polite, if a bit chilly. She lived in a cramped apartment downtown, a place that she frequently lamented was beneath the dignity of her family name. She would visit us twice a week, her eyes darting across our high ceilings and original crown moldings with a hunger she couldn't quite hide. "Vera, darling," she would say, her voice as smooth as cream and just as likely to sour. "This house is such a burden for a young woman. All this dusting, all this history, it's a weight around your neck." "It's not a burden, Elena. It's my home," I'd reply, trying to keep my voice steady. Of course. But you know, Alex has such a vision for development. He could turn this place into a gold mine, a legacy for the children you haven't had yet." I would usually laugh it off, and Alex would always chime in, "Mom, leave her alone. Vera loves this old pile of bricks." He would wink at me, and I would feel a surge of gratitude for his protection. I didn't realize then that his protection was actually a form of isolation. He slowly took over the management of my finances, suggesting that since he dealt with property all day, it was only logical for him to handle the boring paperwork. He made it sound like a gift, a way to free up my time so I could focus on my restoration work in the garden studio. Our evenings were often spent on the veranda, the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine. We'd sit in the hand-carved rockers I'd restored, sipping wine and talking about the future. Alex would talk about expanding the estate, maybe building a second cottage near the creek. He painted pictures of a life so grand and secure that I never thought to look at the foundations. I felt safe. I felt loved. I felt like the mistress of my own destiny, sitting on the porch of the house that defined my family's history. But looking back, the signs were there, hidden in the mundane details of our perfect life. It was in the way Alex's phone would buzz late at night, and he'd step into the hallway to answer it, his voice a low, urgent murmur. It was in the way Elena started referring to the house as the family seat instead of Vera's place. It was in the sudden, unexplained expenses on our joint account, small enough to ignore at first, but consistent. I was so blinded by the warmth of our ritualistic life, the morning coffee, the shared smiles, the plans for the summer, that I didn't notice the shadows lengthening behind me. I didn't see that the man holding my hand was also measuring my wrist for golden handcuffs. The first real crack in the porcelain appeared on a Tuesday, a day that started with nothing more threatening than a light drizzle. I had gone into Alex's home office to look for a stapler, and I found his laptop open. A notification popped up, an email from a notary we had used years ago. The subject line read, "Finalizing the transfer, Willow House Estate." My heart did a strange, fluttering skip, like a bird hitting a window pane. Transfer? I hadn't agreed to any transfer. I told myself it was probably just a refinancing document or something related to the insurance. I closed the laptop, my hands slightly damp, and told myself to stop being paranoid. But the seed was planted, and the soil of our marriage was suddenly starting to feel very cold. The air in the Willow House began to feel thin, as if the very walls were exhaling the oxygen before I could breathe it in. Over the next week, the boring paperwork Alex had been handling started to manifest in physical intrusions. Elena began showing up unannounced, not with her usual store-bought cookies, but with a measuring tape and a notebook. I found her in the sunroom, the light catching the predatory gleam in her eyes as she noted the dimensions of the floor-to-ceiling windows. "What are you doing, Elena?" I asked, wiping sawdust from my hands. I'd been working on an 18th century escritoire, but the peace of the studio had been shattered by the sound of her heels clicking on my hardwood floors. She didn't even look up. "Just thinking about the flow, dear. This room has so much potential if you just knocked out that sentimental partition your grandfather built. It's a waste of square footage." "It's not a waste. It's the architectural integrity of the house," I snapped, my heart hammering a jagged rhythm against my ribs. "And why are you measuring my floors?" Elena finally looked at me, a tight, artificial smile stretching her lips. "Vera, you're so high-strung lately. Alex is right. The stress of this big old place is getting to you. We're just looking out for the family's future. Someone has to be the adult." When I confronted Alex about it that night, he didn't even look up from his phone. The blue light cast ghoulish shadows across his face. "She's just excited, Vera. We talked about this, remember? Consolidating assets, making sure everything is future-proofed. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." "I never agreed to her remodeling my house, Alex. And what about that email from the notary? Transfer of Willow House Estate. What does that mean?" He finally dropped the phone, but his expression wasn't one of guilt. It was one of practiced, weary frustration. "It was a clerical error, okay? I handled it. It was about the new insurance policy under the holding company name." "Stop digging for ghosts, Vera. It's exhausting for both of us." He walked over and wrapped his arms around me. For the first time in 10 years, his touch felt like a physical lie. His skin was warm, but his embrace felt like a cage. I smelled something on his collar, not his usual sandalwood, but something floral and sharp, like jasmine mixed with something synthetic. It wasn't my perfume. The ghosts I was digging for finally materialized on the morning of our 10th anniversary. We were hosting a small dinner party, just family and a few close friends, to celebrate a decade of marriage. Alex had gone for his morning run, leaving his gym bag slumped by the mudroom door. Usually, I wouldn't dream of touching it, but the zipper was caught on a thick manila corner of a folder that was sticking out. I told myself I was just fixing the zipper. I told myself I was being a good wife. But as I pulled the folder out to straighten it, a photograph slid out and fluttered to the floor. It was a candid shot, taken at a sidewalk cafe I didn't recognize. Alex was there, laughing, his hand resting intimately on the small of a woman's back. She was younger, with sleek blonde hair and a smile that looked like it owned the world. But it wasn't the photo that broke me. It was the document clipped behind it. My eyes blurred as I read the heading, "Deed of Gift and Irrevocable Transfer of Title." My name was there, at the bottom. Or rather, a perfect, terrifying imitation of my signature. It was a transfer of the Willow House, my inheritance, my soul, to Elena's private real estate trust. And there, in the fine print of a secondary document, was a consultancy agreement between that trust and a woman named Sienna Vane, the blonde from the photo. The world didn't just tilt, it inverted. A cold, viscous wave of nausea rose in my throat, and I had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. My lungs felt like they had been filled with broken glass. Every breath was a jagged agony. I looked at my hands. They were shaking so violently that the papers rattled like dry leaves in a storm. The betrayal was a physical weight, a crushing pressure on my chest that made it impossible to scream. He hadn't just cheated on me, he had systematically dismantled my life, using my trust as the crowbar. He and his mother had conspired to steal my heritage to fund a life with another woman. I heard the front door open. "Vera, honey, are you up? I brought croissants." Alex's voice was bright, cheerful, the voice of a man who hadn't a care in the world. I shoved the folder back into the bag, my movements frantic and clumsy. I barely managed to zip it shut and scramble back into the kitchen before he rounded the corner. My heart was thumping so loudly, I was certain he could hear it. "Hey, anniversary girl," he said, stepping toward me with a grin. He reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, and I had to fight the instinctive urge to recoil. His fingers felt like ice. "Happy anniversary, Alex," I managed to whisper. My voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone else, someone far away and dying. "You okay? You look a little pale," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. The predator in him was sensing the shift in the air. "Just didn't sleep well. The excitement of the party, I guess," I lied. The words tasted like ash. "Well, get some rest today. Tonight is going to be perfect. Mom's coming early to help with the catering. She's really looking forward to it. She says today is the start of a whole new chapter for the family." He kissed my forehead, a dry, clinical peck, and headed upstairs to shower. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the steam rising from the kettle, and felt a strange, terrifying transformation beginning deep within me. The Vera who restored old furniture, who believed in the beauty of things that could be fixed, was gone. In her place, something colder was hardening. The heat of my anger was gone, replaced by a crystalline, arctic clarity. They thought they had won. They thought I was the high-strung wife who would crumble when the papers were served. But as I looked out the window at the willow trees my grandfather had planted, I knew one thing for certain. I was going to burn their new chapter to the ground, and I was going to make sure they were inside when it happened. Elena arrived 2 hours before the party, trailing a man in a sharp, slate-gray suit whom she introduced as Marcus, a specialist in modernization. She didn't ask if he could enter, she simply led him through the foyer, as if I were a hired maid standing in the way of her progress. They moved from room to room, Marcus tapping on the walls and taking photos of the original wainscoting with a clinical, detached expression. "The bones are good," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the hallway where my grandfather used to hang his coats. "But the layout is archaic. We'll need to scrape it back to the studs to get the open-plan feel the buyers in this bracket expect." "Scrape it back?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I was standing in the kitchen, a carving knife in my hand as I prepped the roast. The metal felt cold and heavy. "Elena, what is he talking about?" Elena turned, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Oh, Vera, don't be so literal. Marcus is just helping us realize the potential Alex and I discussed. You know how sentimental you get. We thought it best to handle the vision part ourselves." "The vision for my house?" I stepped into the hallway. "Our house, darling," she corrected, her eyes narrowing. "Family property. And really, after everything Alex has done to keep this place afloat while you play with your little wood scraps in the shed, it's only fair that the family sees a return on the investment." I looked at her, and then at Marcus, who looked away, clearly uncomfortable. The first twist hit me then. They weren't planning to live here. They weren't even planning to renovate it for us. They were preparing to flip it. They were going to destroy my family's history for a quick payout. "Where's Alex?" I asked. "He's upstairs, getting ready, and I suggest you do the same," Elena said, her tone shifting to one of icy command. "Sienna will be here soon. She's our lead consultant on the interior design. I expect you to be a gracious hostess. Sienna, the mistress. They were bringing her into my home under the guise of a consultant on my anniversary. It was a level of audacity so profound it almost felt like a dream. By the time the guests arrived, I was a ghost in a silk dress. I moved through the crowd, pouring wine, laughing at the right moments, and watching. I watched Alex. He was the life of the party, his hand constantly finding the small of my back in a grotesque parody of affection. I watched Sienna, who arrived in a dress that cost more than my first car, acting with a familiar ease in my living room that made my skin crawl. She stayed close to Elena, the two of them whispering like conspirators. The second twist came when I retreated to the kitchen to fetch more appetizers. I heard voices coming from the pantry. The bridge loan cleared. Elena's voice was hushed but triumphant. We have the funds to start the demo the moment the vacation starts. And Vera? That was Alex. His voice lacked any trace of the warmth he'd shown me minutes before. She'll be in the mountains for 2 weeks, Elena hissed. By the time she gets back and realizes the locks are changed and the permits are filed, the interior will be gone. What's she going to do? Sue her own husband? With what money? We've already shifted the liquid assets into the trust. I don't want a scene tonight, Alex muttered. Let's just get through the toast. There won't be a scene unless you lose your nerve, Elena snapped. Think of the villa in Marbella, Alex. Think of the life you and Sienna can actually afford once we're rid of this white elephant. I stood frozen, the tray of canapes shaking in my hands. They weren't just stealing the house, they were planning to strand me, penniless, while they demolished my home behind my back. They had already stolen my money. I walked back into the dining room. It was time for the toast. Alex stood at the head of the table, his glass raised, the candlelight reflecting in his deceptive eyes. To 10 years, he began, looking at me with a smile that made me want to scream. To Vera, the woman who kept this house, and my heart, together. We've had a wonderful decade, and tonight, we start a new chapter. The guests cheered. Elena beamed. Sienna took a slow, triumphant sip of her wine. A new chapter, I repeated, my voice cutting through the applause. The room went silent. I looked Alex directly in the eyes. Is that what we're calling it, Alex? I thought we were calling it grand larceny and forgery. The color drained from Alex's face so fast, it was like a curtain dropping. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Elena, his eyes wide and pleading. Vera, honey, you've had too much wine, Elena said, stepping forward, her face a mask of motherly concern that didn't reach her predatory eyes. Let's go into the kitchen and… I found the folder, Elena, I said, my voice gaining strength. I found the deed of gift with my forged signature. I found the consultancy agreement for Sienna. And I just heard your lovely chat in the pantry about the bridge loan and the demolition permits. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Our friends looked between us, horrified. Vera, stop this. Alex finally managed to croak. He took a step toward me, reaching for my arm. You're confused. We can talk about this later. Let's not do this in front of everyone. Talk about it later? I laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. Like you talked about the clerical error with the notary? Or like you talked about the villa in Marbella you're planning to buy with the mistress you brought to our anniversary party? I pointed directly at Sienna. She looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Alex? I prompted, stepping closer to him. He was paralyzed. He wouldn't look at me. He looked at his shoes, his shoulders slumped. Nothing to say? No clever real estate pitch for why you're stripping your wife of her inheritance? It wasn't supposed to be like this, he whispered, so low only I could hear. You're right, I said, loud enough for every guest to hear. It was supposed to be a surprise, wasn't it? Well, I have a surprise for you too. Elena stepped in, her voice dropping to a low, lethal hiss. You have nothing, Vera. That deed is filed. The trust owns this house. You're a guest here now, and I suggest you remember your manners before I have you escorted out of my property. Is that so? I smiled, and for the first time that night, the smile was real. It was the smile of a woman who had spent her life learning how to take things apart to see how they worked. You see, Elena, there's one thing you and Alex forgot. My grandfather didn't just leave me this house. He left me his lawyer, the one who specializes in elder law and white-collar fraud. And he's been on the phone with me for the last hour. The third twist was the one they didn't see coming, the one I had held back like a hidden blade. The deed you filed? The one with my signature? I leaned in, my face inches from Elena's. I knew you were dipping into the accounts months ago, so I had my lawyer place a quiet lis pendens on the property back in March. Any transfer, any loan, any gift made without a secondary verification is legally void from the moment it was attempted. You didn't just fail to steal the house, Elena, you just committed felony fraud on a property that was already under legal watch. The silence that followed was absolute. Alex looked like he was about to vomit. Elena's hand went to her throat, her composure finally shattering. And as for the bridge loan? I continued, turning back to the room. Since it was secured against a contested title with forged documents, the bank has already been notified. I believe the term they used was immediate freezing of assets. I looked at my husband, the man I had loved for a decade, and felt absolutely nothing but a cold, distant pity. You should have stayed in the gym, Alex. You're much better at lifting weights than you are at hiding bodies. The silence that followed my revelation was heavy, suffocating the festive atmosphere like a thick, gray shroud. I watched the realization sink into Alex's eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see the man I loved. I saw a small, panicked animal trapped in a spotlight of its own making. The click I had felt earlier, that internal shift from victim to architect of my own survival, was now a roar in my ears. I felt a strange, detached calm, the kind of stillness that comes after a fever breaks. "Vera, please," Alex stammered, stepping toward me with his hands outstretched, a gesture that used to mean comfort, but now felt like a threat. "We can fix this. It was Mom's idea. She thought we were in trouble. She wanted to protect us." "Protect us?" I asked, my voice as sharp and clean as a glass shard. I looked at Elena, who was frantically clutching her pearls, her face a grotesque mask of indignant fury. "She wanted to protect your future with Sienna. She wanted to turn my grandfather's legacy into a down payment for a life that didn't include me." I didn't wait for his answer. I walked past him to the front door and opened it wide. The night air was cool and smelled of impending rain, a welcome contrast to the stagnant air of betrayal inside. Two men in dark suits were standing on the porch, Mr. Eris, my lawyer, and a detective I had met with earlier that morning. "Mr. Eris, I believe you have some papers for my husband and his mother," I said, my voice projecting clearly into the crowded room. The guests began to filter out, their faces averted, whispering in hushed, shocked tones. They moved like shadows escaping a collapsing building. Sienna was among the first to flee, her heels clicking a frantic, rhythmic retreat down the driveway. She didn't look back at Alex once. The consultant was gone the moment the money vanished. Elena tried one last stand. She marched toward the door, her chin trembling with rage. "You think you're so clever, Vera, but you're alone now. You've humiliated my son, destroyed our family name. You'll have this house, but you'll rot in it alone." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but a profound sense of relief that her poison would no longer be part of my daily life. "I'd rather be alone in a house that belongs to me," I said quietly, "than surrounded by people who treat love like a transaction. And as for the family name, Elena, I'm sure the local papers will have plenty to say about it when they report on the fraud charges." The next few hours were a blur of legalities. Mr. Eris served the injunctions, and the detective took statements. Alex sat at the dining table, the same table where we'd shared 1,000 meals, his head in his hands. He didn't speak. He didn't even look up when Elena was escorted out after she began screaming about ungrateful daughters-in-law. Finally, it was just the two of us. The house was quiet again, though the scent of expensive perfume and cheap lies still lingered. "Why, Alex?" I asked, standing by the fireplace. "I would have given you anything. All you had to do was ask." "I was tired of being the husband of the furniture restorer," he whispered, his voice cracked and hollow. "I wanted to be the man who owned the estate, not the man who lived in his wife's shadow. Elena said, she said you'd never notice, that you were too busy with your antiques to care about the real world." "The real world is built on trust, Alex. You didn't just steal my house, you stole my memories of us." I pointed to the door. "Your things are in the garage. I've already had the locks changed on the main house. Mr. Eris will be in touch about the divorce and the restitution for the funds you moved." He stood up, looking older, smaller, and incredibly ordinary. He walked out without a word, and as the door clicked shut behind him, I finally let out the breath I had been holding for 10 years. The months that followed were a grueling marathon of depositions, bank meetings, and legal battles. But with every document I signed, I felt a layer of the old, fragile Vera peeling away. The transformation wasn't just in my circumstances, it was in my soul. I stopped restoring other people's broken things and started restoring myself. The retribution was absolute. Elena's real estate trust was dismantled to pay back the bridge loan she had illegally secured. She had to sell her downtown apartment and move into a small, drab flat on the outskirts of the city, the very kind of place she had spent her life mocking. Alex lost his license as a real estate agent. The scandal of the forged deed made him a pariah in the industry. He ended up working a desk job in a neighboring state, far away from the Willow House and the life he tried to steal. Now, a year later, I am sitting on the same veranda. The jasmine is in bloom again, its scent sweet and heavy in the warm evening air. The Willow House is quiet, but it's no longer empty. It's filled with the sound of my own footsteps, confident and sure. The dark oak floors shine, not because a maid polished them, but because I did, with the same care and patience I give to all things worth keeping. I look at the deed to the house, now safely tucked away in a private safe, its title clear and indisputable. My grandfather's portrait hangs in the foyer, and sometimes I think I see a ghost of a smile on his face. I learned the hard way that you can't fix a person the way you fix a chair. Some wood is rotten to the core and can only be discarded. The sun begins to set, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. I pick up my wine glass, a new one, part of a set I bought for myself, and toast the fading light. I am Vera, the woman who stayed, the woman who fought, and the woman who finally knows the value of her own home. In the end, betrayal is just a fire. It can either turn you to ash, or it can forge you into something unbreakable. As I watch the willows sway in the breeze, I know exactly which one I became. And the best part? I didn't even have to raise my voice to do it. All I had to do was smile and wait for the truth to finish the job.